Welcome everyone to the session on regenerative anticipation presented by our keynote speaker, Fabio Scarano. Fabio is the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair in Future Studies at the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio. He's also professor of ecology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and fellow of the Linnean Society of London. To read about his many other credentials, please visit his profile page on the conference website. I'll paste a link to that in the chat in case you're curious. This session will last 30 minutes and it will be recorded. My name is Caressa, and I'm just here to provide any support that you might need during the session. If you have questions or comments, please enter them into the chat or the little Q&A pod down at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Fabio.
Thank you so much, Caressa. Good day, good evening to all of you across the world. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm very thankful for the organizers, especially Alethea Monteiro, who is with us here, and Rosa Alegria from Teach the Future. It's a real privilege. And the topic I brought to you today is what we are calling regenerative anticipation, which is actually a work in progress. So it's a real privilege to be able to discuss that in this conference with you today. As I was saying, I'm the chairholder of this UNESCO chair that started just a year ago at the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio. It's one of the first UNESCO chairs to be hosted by a museum, actually. And our topic of research and also of practice is this that we are calling regenerative anticipation. And the idea today is to share with you the theory behind that and to show you some of the practices that we've been developing. Well, to start off, give a bit of context, I fully agree with Hannah Arendt's reading that modern life has somehow alienated us from the world. We alienated ourselves from nature around us, from other people, and in doing that, we become a little less human, and we alienate ourselves from our own selves. And as that happens, that has a lot to do with this process of disenchantment. And I somehow agree with Max Weber, who used to say a century ago that science and industrialization and bureaucracy disenchanted the world. I think in the attempt of reduce the world to its parts, we lose a sense of wholeness, we lose the sense of sacredness on things, and that disenchants. And again, alienation and disenchantment are actually fractures, and fractures that produce modules. And in modern life, we tend to separate things. We reduce them to parts, so we can think, talk about environment, social, and self as if they were separate: spirit, mind, and body, past, present, and future, and different forms of interpretation of reality, such as science, arts, spirituality. We tend to treat the things in separate boxes. And as these fractures produce modules, we lose sense of wholeness. And our main premise here is that these fractures should regenerate so that we can envisage some sort of planetary well-being. Our premise is that this planetary well-being involves reconnecting connections that were fractured and lost across time. So for that, convergence is a key word. Separate modules should converge for something new to emerge. And that comes from theoretical thinking of Professor Mario Bonghi, Argentinian, who was based in Canada. He passed away last year. And he has a whole literature. He's a philosopher and mathematician as well. And he claims that for new things, from organs to ideas to emerge, convergence has to take place. And then convergence is, again, another another keyword as we think of an emerging future that can be distinct from the kind of present that we have today with wars and diseases and climate change and all that. And then for this convergence to happen, I resort here to a couple of biological concepts. And as Carissa was telling you, I'm a professor of biology at the university, and I spent nearly 30 years of my life working with plants. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I learned from plants. And regeneration as a biological concept is basically this, what you can see in the screen, is a capacity of organisms and entire systems to self-reform. And this is a capacity that's present in nature, and from Aristotle, this was already a topic of interest and study. And so regeneration should be an important part on this process of convergence of modules and cicatrization of fractures. And anticipation, likewise. Anticipation also is a biological concept as defined by Robert Rosen in this very interesting book, Anticipatory Systems. Anticipation is characteristic of everything living, and it's related to metabolism, to repair, and ultimately to well-being. So perhaps we can think of regeneration and anticipation as concepts. They're both biological concepts, and they are very close to one another in the sense that they involve repair, and this repair will ultimately lead to well-being. And just to give, I won't discuss too much my plants with you, but just to give you a flare of the kind of things we've been working on, anticipatory systems that are regenerative. They are present in nature everywhere. And I have listed 3 of them: stem cells, autopoiesis, and exaptation. Stem cells operate at organism level. It's an unconscious anticipatory system. Sometimes we don't know exactly where they are and we have no control over them, but they're working inside us all the time. And in case we get injured, they are going to be active to regenerate the tissues or organs that get injured. Every living being have such stem cells. Autopoiesis is a capacity that life has to create conditions for more life to appear. And also for, so it's life that create life, not only for your alikes, but also for diversity of life. So stem cells operate at organism level. Autopoiesis operates in the spatial level very much, where exaptation is basically, turning a long story short, is to become adapted for something you have not been under pressure of. It's a different type of adaptation. It's adaptation to the unknown, to the unexpected. And that, in biology, is described as something that takes place in evolutionary time, right? So we have the organism, space, and time. These photographs that you see there, these are from sandy coastal plains in Brazil. These very young geologically ecosystems. They are 3,000 years old. 3,000 years ago, the sea was hitting the mountains. And when the sea moved back 3,000 years ago, it created nearly 10 kilometers of sandy coastal plains in the north coast of Rio de Janeiro, where we live. And in doing so, at first, what you get there is white sands, like beach sand, which is, of course, very dry, very poor in nutrients. But what happened across time was that some plants that in the forest lived on trees, epiphytes, hemiepiphytes, stranglers, such as this tree, the big ones, about 10 meters tall, on the right-hand corner of the screen, a plant called clusia. This plant in the forest is a strangler. It grows on top of other trees and actually kill them. It migrated during the past 3,000 years to this ecosystem, to this coastal ecosystem. And over there, rather than a strangler, it's a facilitator. Underneath clusia, we can find in about 100 square meters of clusia 100 different plant species, let alone animals and all that. So it creates islands of forest on top of sunny places. So this is autopoiesis for you. We call it a stem species, a species that regenerate desert places, bringing diversity into it. And this aerial photograph, what shows is that most of the green dots that you get there are little islands of clusia. It's almost as if they were little islands of rainforest on top of a sandy plain. So these three processes that are unconscious anticipatory systems, stem cells, autopoiesis, exaptation, we try to translate them to human behavior, so to speak. And then what we are calling regenerative anticipation in practice involve these three components of research and action. Ancestral futures has to do with the fact that we believe that there's a lot of the way in which ancestral people, here in Brazil, we have the Amerindian people, we have also the Afro-Brazilian people, and we've been working with Afrofuturism here and also with indigenous futures. And in both cases, to give you an idea, these are peoples who use dreams as ways of dealing with the future, right? Something that in our modern world, we don't often do. We hardly ever dream these days with the way life goes. But we think that this way of dealing with futures is regenerative in many ways. And especially at an organism level, but also at a community level. So ancestral future is one of the components that, if you wish, refers somehow to past cultures that are still present today, but they are perceived by society as something antique. Seeds of the Good Anthropocene is a term created by US-based researcher Elena Bennett, and basically what she has developed, not only research, but also a full web page of cases of the present, of places in the world where sustainable things are happening. And she calls that the Good Anthropocene. Often things related to agroforestry, sustainable cities. So she has a number of examples of things from the present that can inspire better futures. And last but not least, post-development. Post-development are views that are alternative to those of the current development paradigm, and also alternative to the sustainable development paradigm. And I'll be able to talk a little bit more about them, but basically the notion is that this is a world with many universes living on it. It's a pluriverse, but it so happens that we have an hegemonic one that's modern, that's now on the discourse of sustainable development. But we believe that by examining these three levels there of ancestral futures, seeds of the Good Anthropocene, and post-development, that can inspire regenerative anticipation practices. For that, as tools, there's of course research, but there's also dialogues that we've been involved with, and futures literacy labs. This photograph is one such types of dialogues. It's called Selvagem, which in English would mean wild. Is a cycle of studies about life, and basically what it does is to put together, as you can see in this picture, people from indigenous community in Brazil. And here in this occasion we have two of them, our leader Ailton Krenak on the right, and on the left, Duabusan, who is a shaman from Amazonia, from Western Amazonia. And the more central axis here, we have Katia Ribeiro, a scientist, and Emmanuel Cocha, an Italian France-based in Paris philosopher. So these types of conversations started a few years ago. During the pandemic, it migrated to the web, and now it's coming back to present. So these conversations are ways of trying to combine and find common points of interest between indigenous knowledge and science. We've also been doing dialogues of this kind climate change between climate scientists like myself and people of different kind of 40 different types of religions present here in Brazil. And this has been also a very interesting experience. Such dialogues, of course, go also into art and spirituality, and you may see some resemblance there between the plant I have just showed you a few slides back, Clusia, that has been inspiring some artists, friends of us, such as Luacali, the designer and painter, and Ernesto Neto, sculptor, has placed this Gaia mother tree inside Zurich train station for quite a long time, and inside it, it was always hosting conversations with people from different worldviews, from Brazilian indigenous guys and Tibetan monks, and scientists and farmers and all that. So it's been a very interesting kind of dialogue. And these are our Futures Literacy Lab. As I was telling you, our UNESCO chair has started January this year, so it's about to complete a year now. And we started off by providing Futures Literacy Labs to the team of the Museum of Tomorrow. And you can see on the right-hand corner, my friends Philippe Koch and Raoul Smith, both of which are there in Paris, in case some of you are there too, great friends. And on the left, we have just finished another lab, a very interesting one, a deep dive with Luz Damhoff and Ramila, both of them also in Paris. And these labs have been they're really opening up our imagination, and a lot of the reconnection, and the connection and reconnection also of our team. It's amazing how the Futures Literacy Lab creates this space of trust, which I think is essential for regeneration and reconnection between people, even inside workspaces. But just to give you, when we talk about convergence and dialogues and regeneration, I wanted to share with you this diagram. It may look complicated at first, but it's not that bad. What you see inside the triangle, and it's a gigantic simplification, but what you see inside the triangle, let's call it modernity. And inside it, we have a system of policies, we have modern science as the main form of interpretation of reality, let's say the hegemonic one, and we have moral values. And I just noticed that I made a confusion here between science and moral values. It's changed, but science is on the blue balls. But basically, what we're showing there is that in modernity, environmental policy and development policy are separate modules. Science, natural sciences, and social sciences, they are different worlds too. And when we think in terms of modern values, the predominant ethics is human, but now there's more of a concern with environmental ethics and collective. So as these modules converge, as they dialogues, sustainability science, sustainability justice, and sustainability policies emerge. And when they really work well together, we can begin to talk about sustainable development. And there you have sustainable development goals as a set of targets and goals to be achieved by 2030. But all that within the modern framework, right? Now, as science begins to dialogue with arts, with ancestral knowledge, with spirituality, with practical knowledge from rural areas, from urban spaces, there is where we begin to open up imagination. And I think that can be inspiring for a deeper kind of sustainability that we are calling planetary well-being. So it demands dialogues. Sustainable development, in turn, should also be in dialogue with other worldviews, such as Ubuntu from Sub-Saharan Africa, Buen Vivir from Andean countries in South America, also northern views such as that of degrowth, eco-socialism, ecofeminism, and so on. So further convergence is needed with non-modern worldviews, basically, be them ancestral, be them postmodern, so that one can aspire for a more planetary, for a planetary well-being. So this is just to give you an idea of some of the fronts that we've been exploring in our research and practice. And then when we talk about dialectic, and I think a lot of the modern dialectic has to do with the Hegelian view, that's very interesting that for each thesis you have an antithesis, and thesis and antithesis as they dialogue, you reach some kind of synthesis. But another premise of us is that given the huge diversity, that the pluriverse that inhabits our one world, we're more inclined to Plato's definition of dialectic, when he defined this therapy to the soul that leads to knowledge, overcoming pathological ignorance. So it's not on every issue that we must agree and synthesize. We should be respectful and appreciative of differences, and make sure that different aspired futures can coexist in this planet. So I think this is what I have for now. Thank you so much. You have my contact. And in case you have any comments and questions, I'll be willing to entertain you in the time that we have remaining. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caressa, and back to you.
Thank you, Fabio. Do we have any questions from our attendees? I have one as we're waiting for folks to enter into the chat. In regions where biodiversity is critically endangered, the whole ecosystems are critically endangered, traditional conservation methods might be a little bit slow. Could you elaborate on how anticipatory regeneration strategies could be integrated into what we currently have working for us to speed ecosystem recovery?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, Carissa. And we tend, again, in this modularity that I was talking about, we tend to talk on the one hand about biological diversity. And when we think about that, when we think about biodiversity, we often don't include ourselves in it. Right? And on a separate side, we talk about cultural diversity. What's out there, and here in Brazil is very evident to see, is that what exists is actually a biocultural diversity. There's a combination in the places in the world where we have more biological diversity of species is where we have more languages spoken, right? And this connection between the two, we tend to disconnect. We tend to think, well, let's protect nature, let's fence it out in a national park or something. But the best way to protect nature is with people inside, people that can take care of it. So I think that this beginning to gain momentum in Brazil, especially during the last year, that we cannot make conservation without people, and especially when in some of such areas people are not living so well because of different types of problems. How can their life improve without nature being destroyed? And that this to anticipate that is to get these people to talk to one another, to get scientists to talk to them, to learn from them, and vice versa. So I think there's a very horizontal conversation to be built. And I think UN has noticed that. Now we have as we have IPCC for climate change, we have IPBES for biodiversity. And the mandate, I joined IPBES from the start in 2011. And the mandate of IPBES is to create a conversation between scientists and local and indigenous people, because they know they have knowledge about biodiversity that oftentimes science still doesn't have. But then again, every time we talk about dialogue and conversation, people say, well, that takes too long. And we don't have this time. And it does take long, right? But I don't see any other option, because what are we going to do? Are we going to follow the next brilliant idea that shows up? We've done that so many times before, it didn't work, right? So our bet is on dialogue. So I think the best way to anticipate and regenerate is through conversations.
Oh, thank you for that. It's profoundly beautiful to think that we are collectively part of the solution. We have two other questions for you to answer. The first is, how many future literacy laboratories did you launch in Brazil? And do you have anything to report about them?
Thank you so much. Yes, we have provided Futures Literacy Labs now for about 400 people in Brazil. That includes 40 people from our staff at the Museum of Tomorrow, 100 teachers from all over Brazil. We did that remotely. It was a very interesting experience. Teachers of kids, of primary schools, and we also did that to university students. That was year one. And year two, we are going to do it with farmers, with people in companies. We are diversifying the public now. But during the first year, what for me was really surprising, I'd say, from a negative viewpoint, is that I sense that some of the youngsters, especially in more vulnerable areas, they have a very hard time desiring, you know? They can discuss probable futures. They're normally not very optimistic about it, but desirable futures is a long. They're having a hard time, and that for me shows that that the present is really colonizing young people's future, which is more shocking for me. But on the other hand, we also notice that sometimes in some groups there are some young people as well, even in the case of teachers who sometimes a little bit older, who are so imaginative that they end up influencing the whole group, you know, and it kind of opens up. So there's a collective effect, and that for me is also very, very interesting and surprising. The other thing is that we, you know, a lot of the literature and the theory about future studies and also in the practice of Futures Literacy Labs is European, right? And here, since we have all this diversity, we are trying to bring in a lot more of such ancestral views in the conversation, and that's also showing us some very interesting results. We are just about to write a report on our first year, and we'll be happy to share with you all.
Oh, brilliant. Where will we be able to find that report? And
Yeah,
where can folks direct future questions to, should they want to speak with you?
For now, you can use my email. I'll put here in the museum web page. By the end of the year, we will have a complete account of the work of the chair. This first year, we were experimenting, so we didn't open it up so much yet, but now we have some interesting results to share with all of you.
Wonderful. We have 2 minutes left and one question. It's
all right.
From Lena Maya. Would be interesting to learn how your Futures Lab works and how the Museum of Tomorrow is constructed.
Well, the Futures Literacy Labs, we've been using a lot of Riel Miller's method and rationale, but more recently, with the help of Luz Damhoff, we have tried other ways of doing it, and our team is working hard on adapting some of the existing methods to some of the local realities and local publics. So that's where we are now, but still very experimental. The Museum of Tomorrow was built in December. It was inaugurated in 2015 December. So it's completing 8 years now. It was mostly designed originally as a museum of the Anthropocene. So it's very much there's a lot about the history of the planet. There's a lot about the present and the challenges we are going through. And in the second half of the museum, the whole thing about futures is very much about projections and if you do this, what happens to the world if you consume less, if you eat this and that thing. Now, during the next 2 years, we are changing the permanent exhibition, and we want the second half, after we reach the Anthropocene, we want the second half to be more about hope. And therefore, the work of the chair is going to be instrumental for this change in our permanent exhibition. We want diversity of futures, and we want hope, not hope in the sense of sitting down and waiting, but in the sense of actively engaging in change, again, through dialogues. So this more or less what we have in mind, Lina. Thank you so much for your question.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Fabio.
I thank you. It's been
Wonderful
a real
talk.
pleasure.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Cheers.